This shot of the definition of happiness immediately provides our audience with intellectual pleasure, as it introduces the topic of our documentary straight away. By placing this in the beginning, we are suggesting to the audience that this is something they should focus on while watching our documentary, to understand how the definition changes as they watch our documentary.
24 hours in a day, 365 days in a year.
This point of view high angle of the stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame connotes that fame and success does not necessarily lead to happiness as it is being looked down upon. The voice of God, dialogue, provides the audience with informations, uses and gratifications, and intellectual pleasure, as the voice of God is giving them facts on days.
196 countries and 4,416 cities in the world, with around 7.4 billion people inhabiting the Earth, each trying to achieve what they perceive happiness to be. But the real question is there even such a thing as being truly happy?
These past two collages of Vox Pop footage connotes that happiness can be achieved by any person, as by having people of different ages connotes that no matter how old you are or where you belong in society, you can still be happy, therefore promoting the ideology that happiness can be achieved by everyone. This challenges a Marxist reading as it destabilizes existing power structures by showing that happiness is not determined by what class you are a part of. However, the fact that the voice of God is heard over these montage clips contradicts this, as her upper class, well educated English accent connotes her dominance over what is being seen and that the audience should pay attention to what she is saying, therefore making the audience passive rather than active, as she's telling them what to think, particularly when she tells them to think about the idea of true happiness.
I love dealing with art.
Being with my mom, who inspires me and who makes me feel so loved.
What's always made me happy is trying new sports.
What makes me happy? Pasta.
What makes me happy is family.
What makes me happy are my sugar riders.
My dog Pancake.
These collages of Vox Pop footage without the voice of God heard would provide our audience with a form of personal identity, as the focus on what the different people perceive as happiness would give audiences people to relate to when it comes to their own perception of happiness that may be shared. This also promotes the ideology that each person has their own perception as to what happiness is to them. Furthermore, the previous montage shots of the tilt track upward of the artwork connotes that creativity can be associated with happiness. The upbeat melodic score heard throughout these montages connotes the pleasure and enjoyment that achieving happiness will bring and the desire that each person has to be happy. However, the hyper-realism and constructed editing of these shots makes our documentary have more of a televisual style due to the lack of an outer stamp. The collage of montage shots to create the title connotes the universal aspect of happiness and that each person, no matter how old and where they live, can achieve happiness based on how they perceive it.
Happiness can be an emotion and it can be a mood. So it can be a state of mind, but it can also be something a lot shorter. So in general, there's two broad categories of happiness that we have found as positive psychology researchers, which is one is a very short-lived kind of hedonistic form of happiness. It's feeling good. And the other one is one that is attached to meaning, something that is larger than yourself, where you feel life is valuable, you attach a greater meaning to it.
This side-angle medium shot of Yannick Jacob, where he talks about the two categories of happiness that positive psychologists have looked into, immediately backs up the previous shot which explains who he is and introduces his concept on happiness. This immediately provides our audience with intellectual pleasure and appeals to our reformer audience as it provides them with enlightenment through the explanation on the psychology behind happiness. The mise en scène of his office and formal outfit being a suit connotes that he is well educated and a person of importance that the audience should pay attention to and focus on, which is further expressed through the fact that only he can be heard as there is no score.
Um, Positive psychologists have looked into the subject area of optimism and pessimism. And there's two different forms of it. One is the kind of optimism that we usually mean when we say optimism, which is everything's going to be fine, as in like a generally positive outlook on life. And the other form of optimism is an explanatory style, which means how do we explain things that have happened to us, both negative and positive. Every individual, every person needs to negotiate their own sense of happiness. So sustainable happiness is the holy grail, really, because hedonistic happiness can be achieved very quickly. Sustainable happiness is a lot harder to achieve.
The different montage footage seen whilst Yannick is speaking symbolizes the different iconographies of happiness, particularly the one of the boy smiling, since smiles are associated with being happy. The fact that sustainable happiness is being discussed while these are shown distracts the audience from focusing on the concept of sustainable happiness, connoting that hedonistic happiness is something that's more desirable and more associated with the feeling of happiness than sustainable, as Yannick mentions later that sustainable happiness is harder to achieve, which therefore says the medium shot of Yannick stating that sustainable happiness is harder to achieve, which kind of starts a disequilibrium of our production.
Being around my friends and family makes me happy.
I'm happy holding my grandson.
Jinu and I wind down at the end of the day and read our bedtime story.
Philosophers a long time back talked about how politics or the role of the state should be to ensure the greatest good of the greatest number of people, and you could argue that by good they meant the happiness of greatest number of people. So while there be many, like the authors of this book, who say that if politicians make society more equal, we'd have happier, more content society, less violent societies. There are others who argue that if the state redistributes wealth, tries to make society more equal, we are taking away happiness from the rich. Many politicians would say that that's their goal, to keep society happy, but how they define happiness is very different. So while there would be left-wing politicians who'd argue that happiness comes about as a result of equality, justice, there'd be right-wing politicians who argue that happiness comes about when individuals are left free to pursue what they want and the state doesn't intervene. So it's a very contentious term. Everyone wants to claim that term, but what it means is open to debate.
Also, the fact that she says what it means open to debate, meaning happiness, promotes the ideology that each person has their own perception as to what happiness may be, which ties into the culmination theory, as by repeating this ideology multiple times in our documentary, as seen in the beginning through the Vox Pops and Yannick's interview, we are telling the audience what ideology to believe and aspire to. The medium close-up of Sundari, where she is looking at the camera, draws our audience to feel like they are being spoken to, portraying a sense of realism. The fact that she is talking about politics and its association with happiness connotes the universal aspect of happiness in a sense where it can have implications on all aspects of our daily life, as we are all surrounded by politics. Furthermore, the fact that she mentions equality connotes that there is a link between equality and happiness, and that contentment is associated with happiness. However, the fact that she talks about the distribution of wealth taking away happiness from the rich confirms the hegemonic ideology that money equals happiness.
Not sure it's an ideal thing to be truly happy all the time either. It would be a very boring way to live your life. And if you think of it, it's through periods of questioning yourself and having that feeling that there's something missing that people achieve goals in their life, people change the direction of their life. So I think complete happiness would be a very sad position to be in.
This would appeal to our explorer and reformer audience based on Young and Republicum, as we're providing them with like intellect, enlightenment, and kind of discovery of like unhappiness, and that sometimes it's necessary to be unhappy in order to be happy. The fact that Sundari is talking about how true happiness is a boring way to live your life, and particularly the end where she states that true happiness would be a sad position to be in, connotes that happiness is not always as it seems, and that sometimes being unhappy can be a good thing. Her dark clothing connotes the negative side of happiness, and how true happiness can be looked at as being undesirable, which challenges the ideology that happiness is the more desirable factor and an aspect of life that must be achieved and the main goal, representing binary opposition of unhappiness versus happiness, and how kind of challenging that sense where one's more desirable than the other.
Walking through a new city when I'm traveling, waking up in the early morning, and walking around with a coffee and a croissant. That makes me extremely happy.
Making small decisions every day that you know aren't just going to benefit you, but are going to benefit the rest of the world and the other creatures in that world and their environment.
Happiness is a goal. It is something we all look for and hope to achieve. And when that day comes, we'll savor it.
Sometimes the first part of the job is actually to explain the science behind why happiness leads to more success and why it's important to be happy. And
the medium shot of Frederica, combined with a melodic, upbeat score and high-key lighting, connotes the importance and beneficial impact of happiness in one's life, as well as Frederica's dominance and importance in the documentary. This connotes that what she is saying will help influence and guide the audience to finding out what they perceive happiness to be and how they can achieve happiness and chase it as well. The fact that this is the only interview with the score heard suggests that this is the new equilibrium stage of our documentary. All of this combined promotes the ideology that happiness is something that everybody should try to achieve.
And as I did in the talks tonight, telling people that, happy people do actually spot more opportunities. What I help people to do, to actually work on your happiness first. All those things are potentially achievable, success, love, all of that stuff, but you've got to work on your happiness first.
The fact that Frederica talks about how people should work on their happiness first and that success comes after it connotes that happiness leads to success and not the other way around, although it's still part of it. This therefore challenges the ideology that success determines happiness, as she states that happiness comes before success, and in order to really be successful, each person has to work on their happiness first.
And then everything gets a little bit easier. My mission in life, if you will, is to make sure
the pan right of the students laughing, where the ambient noise of them laughing is heard, symbolizes happiness. This promotes the ideology that happiness is desirable and universal, as there are students of different nationalities seen. However, at the same time, the fact that students of different nationalities are seen suggests that they are all part of a boarding school, which connotes wealth. This promotes the hegemonic ideology that wealth equals happiness.
So that people can actually experience that happiness and that contentment and joy and to flourish and thrive without having to go through the hardship first. There is overwhelming research evidence that people who work on their happiness and who are happy, they are more successful. If I had to say to somebody, okay, you can only do one thing to be happy, if that was, the only thing they were going to do, then I would say gratitude is it. Whereas actually a big component of happiness is about having a sense of purpose that's greater than you. I think happiness is about being the best that you can be and enjoying life as much as you can, not just selfishly, but actually for the greater good as well.
The combination of these shots where Frederica is talking about gratitude and not living life selfishly but for the greater good connotes that happiness is about being grateful for the life you have been given and using it to help others. This provides the audience with information in a form of intellectual pleasure, as she tells them how they can achieve true happiness by being a part of something greater than themselves. Furthermore, this would appeal to our audience looking for self-esteem needs, as it provides them with the understanding that in order to achieve happiness, they have to respect themselves and others.
Happiness is about accepting who you are and everything around you. It is a state of mind that you have to find, but always know that there is not one thing that determines happiness.
This extreme long shot of the Hollywood sign connotes that fame, success, and wealth are hard to achieve, which people tend to associate with happiness, therefore connoting that that sustainable and true happiness may be hard to achieve. The fact that Hollywood represents a dream that everyone wants to achieve and aspire to be a part of, but is shown being far away, combined with the voice of God saying, not one thing that determines happiness, connotes that being happy is not only about fulfilling your dreams, and that fame and fortune don't necessarily lead to happiness.
Happiness. It is a combination of different aspects of your life that make you who you are.
This long shot of Tiffany's connotes wealth, particularly since it represents the life of the upper class New Yorkers. This connotes that wealth equals happiness and promotes the hegemonic ideology that money can buy happiness and that the upper class have a higher chance of achieving happiness.
So what is happiness? I don't know. You tell me.
What makes me happy?
What makes me happy?
What makes me happy?
This shot of the new definition of happiness connotes that there is not one true definition of happiness, as we are expressing a new take on its definition. This promotes the ideology that there is not one thing that determines happiness and that it is a state of mind. By doing this, we are looking at our audience as passive, as we are telling them how to look at the subject of happiness and happiness itself, and telling them what it really means, instead of letting them interpret it in their own way, which we would have done by just ending it with the last line of the voice of God, saying, what is happiness? I don't know, you tell me.